Gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I want to thank my good friend from Michigan for yielding me this time, the vice-ranking member of our committee, and my good friend from Illinois, Mr. Holmgren, for co-sponsoring this legislation with me. I do rise in support of 1343, Mr. Chairman, and I think it's a very simple piece of legislation. The chairman of the committee said it was a simple piece of legislation. It's very straightforward. It simply raises the threshold as to the amount of stock a private corporation can give its employees from $5 to $10 million without triggering additional disclosure. What this bill is not about is rolling back disclosure, because as a practical matter, it simply defines the threshold as to when additional disclosure is required. That threshold was originally established in 1988 at $5 million. $5 million was good in 1988. It is no longer good in 2017. We've simply escalated that amount by inflation, and we've come up with the number $10 million, which is proposed in the legislation. One of the reasons this legislation does not roll back disclosures, which is a myth that I intend to debunk here this afternoon, is because as a practical matter, what corporations will do is in fact not give additional stock to their employees if in fact it triggers additional disclosures. That's what actually happens in the private market. Is this threshold defines the amount of stock that a company will in fact give to its employees in any given year. And if we don't raise the cap from $5 to $10 million, we are effectively preventing companies from allowing their employees to share in stock ownership. Private companies make decisions, Mr. Chairman, to stay private for many reasons, either because they're too small and they don't want to go public, or they don't want to in fact disclose their confidential information, or they don't want the costs or burdens of being a public company, or because they don't want to give up control. Whatever the reason that they have, it's a very important decision for a private company to stay private and not go public. And this, the current threshold of $5 million effectively forces a company to make the kind of disclosures it would have to make as a public company if it elects to give more than $5 million of stock to its employees. And we as policymakers should encourage more employee ownership in the markets, because it's good for both the corporations and it's good for the employees. It's good for the corporations because it creates a better culture. It allows the management team and the employees of the company to have a more long-term perspective, and it reduces turnover, which is one of the highest costs that companies have. So it's very good for the companies. But in fact, Mr. Chairman, it's even better for the employees. The data suggests that companies that have high employee ownership are much less likely to lay off their employees during a recession. So it creates effectively better retention, which is obviously in the interest of employees. But the other thing it does, and I think this is the most important point, is it encouraged kind of an inclusive capitalism, whereby workers actually own more of the U.S. economy. And this is something, as Democrats, we should care about in particular, because we've talked for many years about how the growth in the U.S. economy and the increases in productivity has disproportionately gone to capital and not to workers. And we believe there's many reasons this has occurred, but one of the things we should be advocating for strongly is increasing workers' ownership of capital. It'll inevitably lead to more savings among workers, and we will start balancing out the distribution of profits in society. And one of the ways we do that is to eliminate the barriers for companies to issue stock to their employees, which is effectively what this bill does. So if we care about this concept of inclusive capitalism, if we believe American workers should own a greater percentage of the economy and therefore benefit from the productivity enhancements that are occurring in the economy and the economic growth that's occurring in the economy, we should put policies in place specifically to make it easier for corporations to engage in shared employee ownership, which is exactly what this bill does. Can I have one more minute?
Yeah, you have an additional minute.
I have firsthand experience with this. Prior to coming to Congress, I started two businesses as private companies, and they both became publicly traded companies. And I shared ownership in those companies broadly to my team, and it was very good for my business, and it was very good for hundreds of them when those initial public offerings occurred. So I have firsthand experience with this. I do think it's good public policy across the long term, and I encourage my colleagues to support 1343.